The drill stopped making the sound it was supposed to make. Every miner knows that sound, the steady resistance of anthracite, the particular grinding pressure of rock that has not moved in a million years. On the morning of February 14th, 1891, in the lower workings of the Delaware and Hudson Coal Company's No. 4 shaft outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, a drill operator named Thomas Cahill felt that resistance disappear, not gradually, all at once. The bit punched through into nothing, and the nothing on the other side was so complete, so sudden, that Cahill pulled the drill back and put his hand over the hole. He felt air, not the stale recycled air of a mine shaft, moving air, air with temperature, air that came from somewhere with enough space to carry a current. He called for his shift foreman. The foreman called for the section supervisor. By the time they widened the opening enough to lower a lamp, there were 11 men standing in that tunnel, and every one of them went quiet when the light fell through. What the lamp illuminated was a wall, a finished wall, plaster over stone, smooth and deliberate, running at a right angle to the coal face they had been cutting through for 3 weeks. The floor below was not raw earth. It was level, swept clean, the kind of clean that does not happen by accident and does not happen once, the kind of clean that happens repeatedly, over time, by someone who intended to return. Thomas Cahill was 38 years old. He had been underground since he was 14. He had broken through into gas pockets, into flooded chambers, into collapsed sections where the bones of men who died in the 1870s cave-ins were still waiting to be recovered. He had never broken through into a room that someone had decorated. That is where this story begins. Scranton in 1891 was the anthracite capital of the world. The city had grown from a small iron town into a sprawling industrial centre in less than 40 years, driven entirely by the black seams of hard coal that ran beneath the Lackawanna Valley in deposits so rich that the companies extracting them became some of the most powerful corporate entities in American history. The Delaware and Hudson Coal Company, the Lackawanna Iron and Coal Company, the Pennsylvania Coal Company. These were not small operations. They employed tens of thousands of men, owned the housing those men lived in, controlled the stores where those men bought food, and maintained their own private police forces to manage labor disputes that the city government was not always equipped to handle. The men who worked the seams were largely immigrant laborers, Welsh, Irish, Polish, Lithuanian, Italian. They came because the work was available and because the alternative was worse. They worked in conditions that would not be legally tolerated today, in shafts that flooded without warning, in tunnels where the roof came down without sound, breathing air that deposited black dust in their lungs year by year until the lungs simply stopped working. They knew the risk. They worked anyway. And they talked to each other in the way that men who share mortal risk talk, carefully, honestly, and with a particular attention to anything that did not fit the expected pattern of the work. When Thomas Cahill's drill broke through into that hollow space on February 14th, 1891, the story moved through the Delaware and Hudson workforce the way all significant stories moved in that world. Quietly, person to person, in the boarding houses and the taverns and the union halls, with details added and verified and argued over by men who understood what underground geology looked like and knew the difference between a natural cavity and something that had been built. What they were describing was not a natural cavity. The opening Cahill's crew had made was widened over the course of that afternoon to approximately 3 feet across. 3 men entered. Cahill was one of them. The second was his partner, a Welsh miner named Evan Price, who had worked the No. 4 shaft since 1883. The third was the section supervisor, a company man named Robert Dougherty, who brought a second lamp and a measuring tape. What they found inside has survived in 3 separate accounts. The first is a report filed by Dougherty with the Delaware and Hudson's district superintendent, portions of which were referenced in a subsequent article in the Scranton Republican dated February 19, 1891. The second is a letter written by Evan Price to his brother in Swansea, Wales, recovered from the Price family archive by a Pennsylvania historical researcher in 1987 and subsequently published in a regional mining history journal. The third is an account given by Thomas Cahill himself, to a reporter from the Scranton Truth in March of 1891, a month after the discovery, when Cahill had already been dismissed from the Delaware and Hudson's employ and had nothing left to lose by talking. All three accounts described the same room. It was rectangular, approximately 22 feet long, 14 feet wide, and 9 feet from floor to ceiling. The walls were plastered in a smooth grey compound that none of the three men recognized as matching any material in common use in Pennsylvania construction. The plaster had been applied in at least 2 layers, the outer layer finer than the inner, suggesting skilled finish work rather than utility application. The ceiling was arched, not flat, with a low central vault that ran the length of the room. The arch was structural. It had been engineered to bear weight. The floor was stone, cut into large irregular flags fitted together with a precision that left gaps of less than a quarter inch between them, and it was swept. Evan Price's letter to his brother describes this detail with the emphasis of a man who understood what it meant. He wrote, and this is translated from the Welsh, that the floor was cleaner than his mother's kitchen, and that there was no dust, no fallen plaster, no debris of any kind, as if someone had been in the room recently enough that the ordinary accumulation of underground grime had not yet had time to settle. There was no furniture, there were no artifacts, there were no markings on the walls except for a single carved line running along the base of the north wall at floor level, a continuous incised groove approximately an inch wide and half an inch deep that ran the full 14-foot width of the room and stopped at both corners with a small circular depression, as if something had once been anchored there and removed. There was no door, no other opening, no indication of how anyone had entered or exited the room through any means other than the hole Cahill's drill had just made. The room had been sealed from the outside, or from below. Dougherty's report reached the Delaware and Hudson's district superintendent, a man named Charles Fenwick, within 24 hours. Fenwick's response was immediate and did not involve investigation. He ordered the opening sealed, not documented, not expanded for further examination, sealed. The crew was told the cavity represented a structural hazard and that further penetration risked a collapse of the surrounding coal face. This was a standard explanation, and it was not entirely implausible. Unmapped cavities do present genuine dangers in active mining operations, but the shaft was not simply secured and marked for later evaluation. It was filled, concrete and rubble were brought in, and the opening was packed solid within 48 hours of discovery. The section of the tunnel where the breakthrough had occurred was subsequently listed in the Delaware and Hudson's operational records as a played-out face, sealed for structural reasons with no notation of the cavity or its contents. Dougherty's original report, the one that described the room in detail, does not appear in the Delaware and Hudson surviving archive. The Scranton Republican article of February 19th references the report but does not reproduce it. What it reproduces is a statement from a company spokesman confirming that an unmapped void had been located and sealed in the interest of worker safety. The statement does not mention plastered walls, it does not mention a swept floor, it does not mention Cahill or Price or Dougherty by name. Thomas Cahill was dismissed from the Delaware and Hudson Coal Company on February 28, 1891, 2 weeks after the discovery. The stated reason was a violation of safety protocols. Cahill had worked without incident for 11 years. Evan Price requested a transfer to a different section and received it without explanation. Robert Dougherty continued in his supervisory role and gave no further public account of what he had seen. He died in 1907. His personal papers, if they existed, have not been located. Here is the question that the official record cannot answer. The room was finished, not roughed out, not partially constructed, not abandoned mid-work. It was complete. The plaster had been applied to a finished surface and allowed to cure. The floor had been laid with cut stone, fitted by someone who knew how to fit stone. The arch had been engineered by someone who understood load distribution, and none of it was recent. The Scranton Republican article, drawing on Dougherty's report before it disappeared, noted that the plaster showed no cracking consistent with recent settlement. Stone that is newly placed in a mine environment will shift as the surrounding material adjusts to the removed pressure of the coal. The flags in that floor showed no such shifting. They had been in place long enough for the ground around them to have completely stabilized, which in the geology of the Lackawanna Valley suggests not decades, but centuries. The Delaware and Hudson's No. 4 shaft at that depth was cutting through seams estimated by the company's own geologists to have been laid down in the Carboniferous period. The room sat above those seams, but below the documented historical occupation of the region. There is no colonial structure that accounts for it. There is no indigenous construction tradition in northeastern Pennsylvania that produced plastered rectangular rooms with engineered vaulted ceilings. There is no record of any prior excavation at that depth in that location by any company, any government survey, or any private party. The room should not exist, and yet 3 men walked into it, measured it, and described it in enough detail across 3 independent accounts that the description cannot be attributed to confusion or exaggeration. This is the pattern that repeats across the broader record of 19th century industrial excavation in the American Northeast. Shafts dug deep enough encounter things that the official history of the continent has no framework for. The response is always the same: seal it, dismiss the witnesses, remove the documentation, and rely on the fact that the men doing the finding are labourers without institutional standing, men whose word carries no weight against a company's official silence. Thomas Cahill went to the Scranton Truth because he had already lost his job and understood that the story would disappear if he did not tell it. The article ran in March of 1891. It was not picked up by the wire services. It was not followed up by the Republican or any other regional paper. It ran once and was not referenced again in the Scranton press for the remainder of the century. The Evan Price letter survived because it went to Wales, because it left the country before anyone thought to look for it, because a man writing to his brother in Swansea about the strangest thing he had ever seen underground had no reason to think the letter needed to be hidden, and so it wasn't. And so it survived, sitting in a family archive for nearly 100 years until someone thought to look. Those 2 documents, the Cahill interview and the Price letter, are what remain of a discovery that the Delaware and Hudson Coal Company buried under concrete 48 hours after it was made. The room beneath Scranton is still there. The concrete that Fenwick ordered poured in February of 1891 has not been removed. The No. 4 shaft was fully decommissioned in 1931 and the surface infrastructure demolished by 1940. The land above it has changed hands multiple times and is currently occupied by a light industrial facility whose owners have no reason to know what is beneath them and no legal obligation to find out. The swept floor is still swept. The plaster is still on the walls. The carved groove along the base of the north wall still runs its 14 feet from corner to corner, stopping at those 2 small circular depressions where something was once anchored and taken away by whoever was last in that room before Thomas Cahill's drill came through the ceiling. Nobody home. But someone had been. Recently enough to sweep the floor. Long enough ago that the stone had fully settled. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and the space between them is where the real history of this continent lives, below the seams, below the surveys, below the official record of who was here and what they built and how long they were gone before we started digging. Cahill felt the air move when the drill broke through. Moving air means connected space. Connected space means the room was not isolated. It was part of something larger, something that extended beyond what 3 men with 2 lamps could see in an afternoon, before the company sent them back to the surface and filled the hole behind them. The Lackawanna Valley has been mined, built upon, tunneled through, and surveyed for over 150 years. Whatever connects to that room has not been found again. Or if it has, the finding has not been reported. Or if it was reported, the report did not survive. The drill is still in the ground somewhere. Cahill left it when they widened the opening. It went in with the concrete. It is down there with the room, with the swept floor, with the groove in the north wall, with the air that was still moving when the lamp went in and the light fell on plaster where there should have been coal. Thomas Cahill knew what he had found. He said so in March of 1891 to a reporter who printed it once and moved on. He said that a man who has been underground for 20 years knows the difference between something the earth made and something a hand made. He said the room was made by a hand. He said whoever made it knew what they were doing and intended for it to last. He was right on both counts. It lasted. It is lasting still. Waiting in the dark below, a light industrial facility in the Lackawanna Valley, with its floor swept clean and its walls intact, and its single carved groove running along the base of the north wall like a sentence in a language nobody living has been taught to read. That sentence is still there. We just have not sent anyone down to finish reading it.